the Acts of Faith model. The 21st century church, from our perspective, is looking pretty good. Let's just review a little history here. I was called to South Church in 2008. How many of you were here when I was called? Okay, so some of you. I was called, if in case you don't know, part-time. I was working another full-time job for the Sisters of St. Joseph. And after 3 or 4 years, that position was dissolved, and the session agreed to bring me on full-time because as a single mom, I needed full-time work. That was the first act of faith. Totally was, Nancy. Totally. And I know, I didn't know, thinking Nancy was on the session, and I didn't know, I was tearful. I just went to them and said, you know, I don't feel, I prayed about it, I don't feel my work is done here yet. But I can't afford to be working half-time. And it was such a blessing and such a lesson in humility for me, I have to say. Then it moved to full-time. Stated supply means I was hired on a yearly basis, like Laura is right now. And then a year after we sold the building, a unanimous vote of the congregation and the presbytery to move me to a called and installed pastor, so it's a perpetual, like marriage, perpetual relationship. And we may move in that direction with Laura. Some people, I'm going to put this on so you can see some historical pictures as we go along. When I came in 2008, some people knew that things weren't working when I got here. Nancy in particular, it's the church. Well, I don't think you weren't treasurer. Were you a treasurer then? But she was aware of finances, and she greeted me one day in my second month on the job in 2008, and she said, you know, we're going to run out of money in about 6 or 7 years. And I'm thinking, hyperbole, hyperbole, hyperbole. And I truly didn't believe it. And I think she knew that. And then a little while later, a few months later, a couple of years later, it really became clear that she was speaking truth. Church treasurers around the country are having sleepless nights and great agita. And I know that Janice felt this way. You're worried about how you're going to pay the bills. They're the ones who get the notice things are getting bad. They're like the canaries in the mine. They're the ones with the sleepless nights. But this, what you see up there, and this, what you see in this room, and this, what is out there in the community that we can't see today, this is who we are. We were people of a building, in our case 2 buildings, leading a normal church life. And God called us to leave in order to still be a church. It is amazing. It is amazing what God has done and is doing with our merry little band of believers. Just because we said yes to God all these 11 years. What we did from 2008 until now, in both New Life and South, has required a lot to get from a traditional church building to a multi-site, multi-location, decentralized church. Has taken energy, intelligence, you see where this is going, I bet. Imagination, what's the last one? No, love. Those are our ordination vows that we've all taken if we're deacons and elders. It's also required a lot of faith. And I have to tell you, it takes a lot of courage. We all started seeing how the world was changing. Society was changing, churches and temples and synagogues and mosques and schools and even banks and gymnasiums and stores. Everything was changing. So we started looking at ourselves, whether it was on Monroe Ave or on Mount Hope. And we started having some excitement when we went to conferences. And we realized we weren't alone. Whether we were at a conference for college and university chaplaincy or something on church transformation or evangelism, it was super important to us that we go, because that's when we learned that we weren't alone. We found out that everybody is going through these changes. But I have to tell you that not every church will be able to be as brave as we were. And some will start too late. And that for some, it's just the idea of change is just too hard. And they need to withdraw. And both of our congregations had people like that. And we love them dearly, and we're still close. But they just were not called to be part of this transformation and transition, and that's okay. I want to introduce you to the Choluteca River in Honduras. In the 1930s, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers built this bridge, and it revolutionized the entire region. You see the village off to the side there, and there was a lot of farming community off to the right, and this became a major highway across the country. And then you jump ahead to 1998, when Category 5 Hurricane Mitch hit that area. Look at this. The bridge remained where it was, but the river was changed. It rerouted the river. The power was so intense, it rerouted the river. So the bridge goes nowhere. It serves no purpose. It's completely meaningless now. It's irrelevant. And a lot of us wonder, what does this say about church? And how the broader society feels about church. The river of society or culture changed. It keeps changing. It's alive. It keeps flowing and living and moving. But the bridge, institutionalized church, just didn't.
Why don't they just turn it around?
Yeah, there's a thought. We are going to look at some options in a minute, Jane. And this is exactly how a lot of us feel about the changing church, or at least how we felt about it, 10 years ago. When we looked at, when I first saw this, I'll be honest with you, I thought, oh, it's going to be like the temporary rivers that form in our Southwest, and it will go back to the original path. Well, it's not. This is, 20 plus years ago. How the heck does a river change its course? How the heck do people stop coming to church? So at South, we did a lot of reading on generational differences, and that's when it hit us that, technology changes. Didn't even have an internet or microprocessing the way we do now with cell phones, let alone smartphones in the 60s. Fashion has certainly changed, but it's not just the fashion, it's the attitude of the women wearing the fashion. That's all changed. Our children and grandchildren no longer look to one person standing up in front of them imparting knowledge while they sit there and take notes and regurgitate it. The same is true for our churches. Gen X, Gen Y, Millennials, Gen Z, they all want participatory activities. They're used to having their minds stimulated with color and movement. They want to be part of the solution. They want to be part of the process. They want to be part of the action and not just observers. So why wouldn't we expect our churches to change? We don't think about it often, but change is in our DNA as a church. None of Paul's churches are still in existence. We don't worship like we did in the 60s. Times change. In the 1950s, many of us were alive then. In the 1950s, churches had a different need. People had returned from war, they were building families. They hoped it would be the war to end all wars. Men and women had a different spiritual need. They wanted to give thanks for survival. They were hopeful for the future. They wanted to be reverent about their many blessings. They'd survived more than a decade of this war and war footing. They needed to rebuild. But the 1950s and the huge attendance of the 50s and the early 60s were an anomaly throughout history. More church going has been like it is today, not like it was then, if we look at Christian history. Where some people are very involved, that would be you folks. And most only attend when they need something, or Christmas and Easter, or a wedding or a funeral. And churches are small groups unless you're in a city that can support a big congregation. Third church is an anomaly. First Presbyterian in Syracuse has closed. It closed probably a decade ago. And out of the 4 biggest churches in Buffalo, only one, Westminster, has more than 500 members. The church keeps changing. We keep changing. And as Presbyterians, it's all about reforming what we do. And that's what South, that's what all of you, and all of our incarnations around the community, that's what we've gotten really good at. Really good. We are change agents. We are a test kitchen for the denomination because we're constantly trying new things. So in looking at what we are called to do and to be in the 21st century, there are a few options. It's not quite what Jane said, but similar. We could extend the bridge to the other side of the river. That's kind of what the Next Church movement is doing. Some of you have heard of that. It's talking about what is and looking at how to innovate and see what's next. Redesign the bridge so it's functional in today's world. That's one option. Another is to take the communities, because you notice the community off to the left there, that was wiped out too. But take communities, and where you see these green splotches, start new communities around the river in this case. We can have new communities connected to where the river is now. Some might even live in the shadow of the old bridge. I think that's what the 1001 New Worshiping Communities initiative is about. We have 2 of those in our acts of faith that are recognized by Louisville. What are they? What are our 2001 groups? Back to Center and Fellowship of Faith. In fact, our presbytery has 3 new worshiping communities. 2 of them are ours. What's the third one? Yes, Companions on the Way. And they needed a church session to supervise them. So they came to us 3 years ago and said, would South be our partner church? And we said yes. So that's why on our calendar you will see Companions on the Way and their activities. I will tell you that given the choice of starting something new and refining or revising what's old, you know which one's easier, the new thing. So what we are doing has been a real challenge. And it's a real challenge to most of the rest of the Presbyterian denomination. How do you take what exists and change it into something new? Well, you do that when you recognize you own the bridge. If you own the bridge, there's a lot of things you can do. You can disassemble it and reassemble it where you need it, like over the water chain. Or you could sell the bridge, finance it to do whatever you need to do. You could break it down to smaller parts and make it into other things. Sadly, a lot of people think that in order to honor the people who came before them, they have to keep the bridge the way it is. Kind of silly.
There's no excitement in that.
There is no excitement, that's right.
No excitement.
But I will tell you that your session decided years ago that we were honoring the legacy of those who came before us by trying something new, because both on Monroe and on Mount Hope, our predecessors were innovators. They tried new things, or we wouldn't have been here. So to sum it up, I mean, you can either do something new, keep what is, do a combination of the two, which is what we are doing, we were going to run out of money by November 11th, 2014. While both New Life and South started out selling their buildings because of money, by the time we both did, we knew that we had to because the buildings were hampering us. They were keeping us from doing what we needed to do. For those of you who weren't here for the whole process, that was a little bit of our logic and reasoning. We had to do something or we were going to die. And if we were going to start through the maze, well, we had to look at where did we come from? And this is the logic that we used. This is important to remember this as we move forward, okay? We started then, across from the University of Rochester, relocated a couple of times, membership grew. In 1959, when the building was created as it is now, there were 752 members. And that grew to 900 in the 60s. And then in 2014, we had 45 members. We had a 95% drop in membership, like most churches. We're not unique. What was unique was this next thing. We thought if that's the case, then we should only 5% of our building, since we're 95% smaller. I mean, think about it. We're good at downsizing our homes when the kids are gone. Businesses downsize their footprint if automation decreases the need for that size. But most people will not even think about it when it comes to their church, and yet everybody in this room did. That makes us different and unusual. Think about when we sell a house, though, we come to love the new house even more. But nobody wants to talk about that in the life of the church. You know, we'll stay right there, we'll rent out the space. Well, we all tried that. And even though it might work, we found ourselves really forgetting that we're called to share the good news, and instead we were just there to collect the rent. And that's not the purpose of a church. We all found that taking care of the building inhibited and stifled us. We were at a dead end in the maze. We were thinking about the boiler, Gordon, and the roof and shoveling and organ maintenance and painting and mowing the lawn and figuring out how to pay for all of that. And we didn't have time to spread the good news because we were too tired.
Where's that boiler now?
There you go. As membership and money went down, we started talking. We realized that when we imagined not having a building, our energy and excitement went up, up, up. So we had to figure out, well, what do churches do if they're not trying to attract people? Because frankly, we'd never had experience with that. We'd always been trying to attract. We knew it was time for a change, and the change shakes things up. That was a little unnerving for some of us, I think. Mary Lee.
No.
Mary Taglieri. But I have to say, that's what Jesus did. He shook things up. So we have a good model. All of us were brought up to be part of this, where you create a program, you attract new people, you collect money and get volunteers so that you can create new programs, and it just keeps going in this cycle. So we knew we had to break the cycle somehow. And this should be nothing new to anybody here. We've all looked at this before, so I'm going to turn it over to you. You tell me, based on your experience, what's the difference between an attractional church and a missional church? Don't just tell me what's up there. As you live this in your life, what's the difference between an attractional church and a missional church?
Attractional church is stagnant.
It's attracting.
Just like attractional is stagnant, it's in one place, Dina?
Yeah, it's a location.
It's a location.
Church with me is the church is out
Church is out there.
there. It's walking around with every member.
Okay, it's walking around with every member.
And a lot of the energy, if not most of it, is directed, how do we get people to come into our building?
Right, for attractional church, most of the energy is how do we get people to come in. Yeah.
Missional is going out.
Missional is going out to them. So I'm going to ask you to be really honest here. Think of a scale where you've got 1 to 10, and 10 is that you think in terms of missional church all the time. And yet most of us now are on the attractional side. Sorry, missional side, thank you.
Yeah,
Yes.
the question. Part of me is not totally on the missional side, because in a way, at least in fellowship of faith, New Life on Monroe, we had that stationary place again to worship.
And we want to attract people to it.
Yeah.
That's right. It's in.
And so what does that mean? Yeah, so what does that mean to the model? Yeah, and that's what we have, the thing we have to be very careful of. I remember the first year after we had left the building, somebody on session, maybe Amy or whoever it was, but somebody on session said, we cannot just substitute the Meadows. We cannot just substitute the Meadows for East Henrietta Road. We can't just see that now as the church. And I think that's what we all struggle with. That's the tension. That's what we hold in tension. How do we do acts of faith? Knowing that anything could go by the boards if there's not energy and excitement. What are you going to say, Sherry?
Being probably the newest person to this whole thing, concept, church, everything, I'm super excited about what I now go out and talk to people about as opposed to have them come to me. I really feel it because I never knew it any other way. I think it's beautiful.
That's true.
So cautionary tale that we need to keep choosing to be missional. One of the things that helped us a lot, and some of you are going to laugh when you see this, it's a 2-minute video. There are 2 2-minute videos I'm going to show you. This first one really changed our lives, no exaggeration. And I want you to see this again, through new eyes. What does it look like to you now?
This is the missional church. Simple. In the past, churches have spent large amounts of resources to construct the most attractive places imaginable for the community in which they were situated. Great music, compelling teaching, and a host of programs designed to gather people together were the staple of such church communities. Anyone who wanted to come was welcome, and church members were encouraged to invite their friends and neighbors. Generally, people had a pleasant experience. The people who came and were cared for seemed relatively similar. Education, income, pastimes, race, struggles, and histories seemed to be almost identical. Eventually, someone asked the question, what about all the people who aren't like us, but who live around us? Why aren't they here too? In response, the church increased its marketing budget, direct mailing the community, taking out ads in local papers, buying radio time, releasing a fresh web page, and offering to host the world's greatest event. The church was determined to be the center of everything great that happened in the community. Church members began to rely on the church to do the work of conveying God's story in the world. If someone could be brought to an event, they could hear about Jesus from a professional teacher. Inviting people became synonymous with evangelism. The missional church, on the other hand, empowers its members to be the church in the community. The church trains, resources, encourages, and challenges its people to live out the good news in their community with those who would otherwise be suspicious of a church and its marketing efforts. The church sends out its members to live among people unfamiliar with church customs, songs, and what it holds sacred, just like a foreign missionary. The missional church recognizes then that every believer embodies the life of the church in their neighborhood, in their school, or at their place of work. Each one of them telling God's story in the context of compassionate and genuine relationships.
I'm willing to bet you see that differently now that we do what we are doing than you did when you first saw it. Whether that was back in 2010 when I showed it, or 2014 at New Life. 15, sorry. Missional is a mindset. And we all have had to figure out how to get into the community and become more missional. So here's the second one of the videos that follows that first one.
This is missional community. Simple. Bob is the owner of the local hobby shop and president of the remote control airplane club. Each Wednesday after work, the members of the airplane club get together to race, share in the joy of airplanes, compare designs, and to pass on the knowledge of model airplanes to their kids and grandkids. Bob goes to a church service with his sister on Christmas Eve and decides to become a Christian. He regularly attends Sunday services, finds his way into a small group, and joins the Wednesday night church gathering. He realizes that his commitment to church programs and his commitment to the airplane club are at odds. The church leadership empathizes with the situation but tell him it'd be better to attend the Wednesday program rather than spend time building airplanes. The church leadership also encourages Bob to get more involved in the church, leaving no time for airplanes. Bob agrees. Giving up a silly hobby will be his sacrifice for the Lord. Eventually, Bob's friends begin wondering what happened to him. In their minds, he was a critical part of the model airplane community. When they wander into his hobby shop, they ask, "What happened to you? We miss you." Bob begins to realize that he's becoming an outsider to all the conversation, significant or otherwise, that always unfolded during their Wednesdays together. Bob explains that he found something more important than model airplanes, and he even offers an invitation to the Wednesday night church meeting. Some of the airplane club try out his church because they respect and love Bob. But a lot of them decide not to go because they value the time together with family and friends on Wednesday evenings. After some time, Bob becomes a key leader in the church and hears his call to go and reach those people he knew from the club. Since giving up the regular meeting with the club, his interaction feels more difficult than he'd imagined. After all, Bob, their leader, left them for what seemed to be just another club on Wednesday evenings. Somewhat troubled, Bob decides to take a break from Wednesday night church gatherings and re-enter the world of model airplanes. Some in the church were deeply concerned for Bob's spiritual well-being. Others were disgruntled. Then someone asked the question, what if we resource Bob to be even more effective at building healthy community where he already is? Let's help him to better live out more of Jesus' heart for compassion, generosity, peace, and love among people that know him best. After all, Bob is the most likely access point for those people to encounter Jesus. The church agrees. Bob's church is now determined to help him follow Jesus and assist him in living out his faith in the community that had been built around him. Bob now sees both his dedication to his church and to the model airplane community as critical components in following Jesus.
And that's what we do. And that's what you do. And I wanted to put it in a broader context for you. And that's also why leadership development is so important with the Acts of Faith model. Equip people to share their faith wherever they go. Well, we could do that, right? We're Presbyterians. We know how to teach. We've got great resources. So when we started thinking about ourselves in terms of, Bob and the model airplane club, things happened, and the rest is history. And now we have soon to be 19 or 20 acts of faith. We sold South Building. A year later, New Life wanted to learn about the AOF model. Ultimately, you sold your building, and now we're all one. We're all one church, one faith, one baptism, one budget, and one future. So the question is, where are we now? Are we still thinking outside the box? Or are we starting to think of acts of faith like we did our buildings? Like they have to stay where they are, configured the way we are. We've always done it this way for the last 5 or 10 years. Always? I don't think so. That's what we're going to start taking a look at after we take a quick 7-minute break for drain and refill, and then we'll come back and jump into our first Bible study with Laura. Okay? Thanks, everybody. Where are the bathrooms?